Hi Chad, it's Dr. Kemry. So I'm going to use this video to just give a quick overview of your mind map and give you some feedback. So the stroke prevention education related to hypertension control is a good one. I believe we discussed this. So let's go on to your theories. Okay, so good work here with the constructivist, or the cognitivist, theory that you understand that there's more than one theorist that engages in this particular theory or aligns with this particular theory. The view of the knowledge is that the knowledge is mental construction, right? So kind of the cognitivist or cognitivism theories, I say, is more like computer-like, right? It's all about processing, right? And linking those processes together, right? The view of learning, right? Internal mental processes, absolutely correct. The role of the student, that all looks good. Just remember in the role of the student that it's sequential, right? And that the educator needs to structure that content, not just to structure the content of the learning activity, but to structure it in like a process type way, right? So we're thinking computer when we think about that. And you're talking about cognitivist, and you're saying that providing a quiz on blood pressure management. Well, quizzing, kind of, but remember it's more about processing, right? Games can be used, but they would have to be used in a way, utilized in a way that it was the game, right? The gaming metrics were focused on the process, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can look at assessments, right, and instruction, but you need to make sure that you're specific to that theory, right? So what would make that different? Could you use gamification if your theory of education is behavioralist? Well, you could, right? So how would those particular things be different, right? Based in the theory, okay? Not just this is a thing that I can use or tool I can use. Okay. So for humanists, remember this is kind of student driven, and it's in their own time. I like to say it's more holistic and based on the student, right? So some of those theorists are Maslow, good, and Rogers, good, very good. So you didn't have to list all of them, but give me some, and that works. View of knowledge. Here, I'm wondering about your description of the view of knowledge, right? So the individual knowledge is right, internal, right, and subjective, right, because it is based in that particular individual. But when you say observations are situational and contextual, I'm wondering what you mean by that. So that, what I think you mean, is that students are gaining knowledge or learning, right? Their knowledge is learned in the context of where they are right now. So if a learner is in a classroom versus a learner in a innovative and interactive simulation lab, a humanist would see that as definitely both of those things, that context impacting learning, right, in a different way for each individual. So make that clear. Yes, knowledge can be created in a variety of contexts, right? But how would each theorist or theory look at that differently? Okay, so be maybe a little bit more specific with that, right? So the view of learning, you're talking about increased metacognition and process information, right? They construct meaning and knowledge from the experience. I think that's key, right? The construction of meaning and knowledge from the experience, not so much the increase in information, right? I think all of this is when people interact with others within the context, right? So make that clear, because at first I was unclear with what you were saying here, right? And self-actualization is definitely part, right? It's self-directed, right? Autonomous learning, right? And you're definitely a facilitator in the humanistic standpoint of learning, of education, right? Multiple materials need to be provided, right, for the students in a humanistic type of setting. Okay, so next thing you have is social learning, right? So I think when you're talking about social learning, though, and social learning theory, and you list Bandura, I want you to remember that when you talk about Bandura and social learning theory, that is his social learning theory. So if you're talking about the social learning theory, you are talking about Bandura. And remember, that kind of bridges behavioralism and cognitivism, right? So cognitivism. So just remember that social learning theory melds those two things, right? And this views what they've learned and how people process information, right? That self-efficacy has to be a piece of social learning, how the learner perceives themselves. Okay, so much like Carol Dweck talks about how a learner thinks whether they have a growth mindset, right, or not. So Dweck's work is very much aligned with Bandura's self-efficacy theory, which is part of the social learning theory. Okay, so we're talking here about how the theory informs instruction and teaching in the teaching scenario, right? So lifestyle, and you're saying lifestyle and social learning theory, right? And the lifestyle changes can be more long-lasting, right, and be integrated easier if there's a group, right, a support group or a peer group, right, because that's constructed in a social network, right? So that's a good way to explain that. So then, I'm looking for your other piece of your mind map, which got a little wonky over here. So you have behavioralism, right? And behavioralism is kind of responsive or passive learning, they call it, right? So, and you're talking here about Skinner, right? And Pavlov, right? Should be listed here, which you have them listed here, which is good. You're saying that knowledge is created based on what the teachings and environment provided by what teachings and environment are provided by the educator. It's actually not. It's more like that positive reinforcement or punishment, right? So remember, in behavioralism, this passive learning is happening due to either the quest for something good. So think of it like scores and grades, right? That kind of drive. Or to get away from punishment or negative, right? Negative input, which would be, if you're doing, and I don't say you would ever do this, but if you're doing something correctly, you don't get any type of feedback, but when you do something wrong, the glass slams shut over the picture that you're looking at or whatever. The computer shuts off if you get a wrong answer or something like that. So think about behavioralism in that way. You're trying to elicit learning, elicit behavior that will increase learning. Now, I'm not a big fan of this. I mean, I know we have to do testing, and testing is kind of behavioralist, but it tends to push the learners into that one very narrow swath of behaviors, right? So learners don't grow, right? They don't grow and achieve if they're only focused on that one thing, right? That prize, right? They're focused just on that, right? And definitely the role of the educator is to create that environment that has that kind of feedback loop in it. So here I think you got a little off track with your mind map. I don't understand why these lines are coming off of your central question. They should all be coming off of behavioralism, right? So the role of the student is to behave, in that way, right? Waits for order from the educator or waits for the next positive feedback or negative feedback, right? From the educator or from the facilitator, right? So you're thinking that it could be used in a rehab facility, right? Factors can be controlled, like diet and things like that, but is that really a teaching? Is that really teaching? Just withholding food, right? Or giving medication, or withholding certain foods like, chips and dip and that kind of stuff. I'm wondering if learning is taking place or if that's just they can't access it. So they don't have it if they can't get to it, type of thing. So rethink that. And I don't understand why we have a backgrounds piece here that flows off of your general question. I mean, the information here is good, but I don't see how that is part of the mind map. Maybe part of your write-up on Blackboard, but not part of this mind map. So if you have any questions for me about any of my feedback, please feel free to email me.